It was supposed to be a celebration. My 70th birthday had always felt like a milestone, a marker of all the memories I had collected, the life I had lived, the family I had raised. But that morning, instead of laughter, instead of cake and candles, there was silence. If you are new here, please subscribe my channel and press bell icon to get notification. I woke up with a gentle creak of the floorboards under my feet, the morning sun barely spilling through the curtains of my bedroom. For years, this house had been my sanctuary, filled with family photos, mementos from my children's childhoods, and small details that whispered stories of a life well lived. I poured myself a cup of tea from my favorite floral mug, the one my late husband had bought for me decades ago. Steam curled up in the quiet room, but my heart didn't feel the warmth of the ritual. I checked my phone automatically, expecting messages, calls, anything. But there was nothing. No happy birthday, Mom, no cheerful emojis from my children. I shook off the unease. Perhaps they were busy. Perhaps they had a surprise planned. By mid-morning, the truth became impossible to ignore. My son, Robert, had not only forgotten to pick me up from my little birthday breakfast plan at the local cafe, but he hadn't even called. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the empty space across from me where he usually sat, his hands waving excitedly at me, his laughter filling the room. The clock ticked on. Minutes felt like hours. Anxiety started to creep in, clawing at the edges of my heart. I decided not to wait any longer. If he didn't care to come, I would take matters into my own hands. With shaking hands, I called a car rental service, reserving the first available vehicle. I packed a small bag, just essentials, some clothes, my purse, important documents, and a small notebook with notes and memories I often carried for comfort. The air in my home felt heavier as I opened the front door, the sunlight spilling onto the porch, but failing to lighten the dark weight on my shoulders. The drive was long, the winding roads through the neighborhood feeling eerily empty without the presence of my children. Memories flooded my mind. Robert as a boy, with scraped knees and endless curiosity. My late husband laughing as we baked together in the kitchen. Small family dinners where everyone talked over each other, the chaos filled with love. And now silence. Pure, cruel silence. Arriving at the house where I had grown up, the one Robert had promised to maintain in my later years, I noticed something immediately. The driveway was empty and the door had a new lock. A chill ran down my spine. My hands trembled as I fumbled for the keys I had kept hidden in the drawer. They didn't fit. Panic rose like a tide, a suffocating wave I hadn't expected. How could my own son? I stepped back, taking a shaky breath. I tried calling him, dialing his number again and again, but each time it went to voicemail. 45 calls later, the truth settled over me like ice. I had been locked out of my own home. The walls that had sheltered me, that had held the laughter and memories of decades, now stood as silent witnesses to betrayal. My chest tightened. Betrayal by a child is a pain unlike any other. It is sharper than any disappointment, deeper than any loss, because it comes from the one you nurtured, loved, and trusted unconditionally. I looked around the empty yard. The familiar garden overgrown with weeds, the swing set rusted from years of neglect. Everything seemed abandoned, yet I knew it was not abandoned. It was a calculated exclusion. Robert wanted me out, and not tomorrow, not next week, but today, on my 70th birthday. The thought made me dizzy, as if the ground beneath me had shifted. I sank onto the porch steps, my bag at my side, staring at the door. My mind raced, trying to piece together why this had happened. Had there been arguments I had forgotten? Mistakes I had made? I had always given my children everything: love, guidance, support. Was it not enough? I felt a bitter, unfamiliar twist in my gut. Anger. Pain. Loneliness. Hours passed, and I found myself wandering the edge of the property, memories of my children flooding in. How many times had I driven them to school? waited up for them at night, comforted scraped knees and broken hearts. And now, I was treated like a stranger, a visitor who had overstayed her welcome in her own life. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. I realized with a sinking heart that I could not wait for Robert any longer. The night would be long, but I would survive. I had survived loss before. I had survived illness, heartbreak, the passing of my beloved husband. And tonight, I would survive my own son's betrayal. I drove to a nearby motel, the neon sign flickering as if to mock me, and booked a room. The room was small but safe. I unpacked my essentials, laying them carefully on the bed, each item a reminder of a life I had built, a life I still commanded, despite what had happened. As I sat by the window, watching the moonlight dance on the darkened streets, my mind refused to rest. Questions swirled endlessly. Why now? Why my birthday? What had changed in Robert's mind? Did he realize what he had done? Would he regret it? Would he call? The clock ticked relentlessly, each sound echoing in the quiet of the room. My heart ached with longing and confusion. In the stillness, I remembered my own mother, who had taught me resilience, courage, and pride. I whispered her name, feeling a quiet strength awaken within me. I would not wait passively for apologies or explanations. I would reclaim my dignity, my space, and if necessary, my justice. My son may have cast me aside, but I was not defeated. The night stretched endlessly, but with each passing hour, a plan began to form in my mind. Tomorrow, I would return to that house. Tomorrow, I would confront the betrayal. And tomorrow, my son would understand that his actions had consequences he could never undo. The first night of solitude was only the beginning, and in that quiet room, I allowed a small, defiant smile to cross my lips. I was not powerless. I was not broken. And tomorrow the story would change. The next morning, the chill of dawn crept into my bones, but it was nothing compared to the icy knot in my chest. I woke early, my mind racing with the events of the previous day. The betrayal was still raw, the sting of being locked out by my own son refusing to fade. Yet beneath the anger and heartbreak, determination burned. I could not, and would not, allow this to define me. I dressed carefully, selecting clothes that made me feel strong, composed, and unshakable. Though my body was 70 years old, my mind was sharp, and my spirit unyielding. I grabbed my bag, ensuring all my essentials were in place, and stepped into the car I had rented. The engine hummed as I drove the familiar roads back to the house. Every turn brought memories. The laughter of my children in the yard, the smell of fresh-baked cookies wafting from the kitchen, the countless holidays spent together. But now, the same streets seemed foreign, hostile, each passing house a silent reminder that what was mine had been tainted by betrayal. When I arrived, I parked a distance away and approached on foot. The house loomed large, its familiar silhouette casting long shadows in the morning sun. I noticed immediately that Robert's car was gone, a small but significant detail that set my mind whirring. Had he expected me to return, or was this his way of pretending ignorance, acting as if nothing had happened? My heart pounded as I neared the door, rehearsing words I might say, bracing myself for a confrontation I knew would be tense, emotional, and unpredictable. I rang the doorbell. No answer. I knocked firmly, my knuckles echoing against the wooden door. Silence. I called his phone again, and for the first time in hours it rang. The line connected and I heard him breathe heavily. "Mom, you're here?" His voice was hesitant, almost guilty. "Yes, Robert, I'm here." Open the door. There was a long pause. I could hear faint shuffling on the other side. The lock clicked, and the door opened slightly, enough for me to slip through. The sight that greeted me made my chest tighten even further. The house was the same, yet different. The warmth and comfort I had known all my life seemed drained away. Personal items were moved, pictures slightly angled or removed, a subtle attempt to erase traces of my presence. Robert stood in the hallway, his hands raised defensively. "Mom, don't," I interrupted, my voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "Don't try to justify this. Don't make excuses. You locked me out. On my birthday." My words echoed in the empty space, and I could see the weight of guilt in his eyes. But guilt alone would not undo what had been done. I didn't mean for it to happen like this," he stammered. "I thought? You thought what, Robert? That I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't feel betrayed?" My voice cracked, but I forced myself to stay composed. "I gave you everything, all my love, my time, my trust. And you treated me like I was nothing." His face fell. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the boy he used to be. The one who clung to my hand when he was afraid, who sought comfort in my presence. But that boy was gone. He had grown into a man capable of cold indifference, or so it seemed. I moved through the house, inspecting the changes he had made. Small details, but each one a message. This was no accident. The locks, the absence of his car, the rearranged furniture, it was intentional. My anger surged, but beneath it, I felt a growing sense of clarity. If he wanted a war of control, I would not cower. I would reclaim my space, my dignity, and my authority. "You need to tell me why," I said calmly, though my hands were clenched at my sides. "Explain to me why you thought this was acceptable." Robert's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. I didn't know how to handle it, Mom. I thought maybe you wouldn't like the changes. I didn't want to hurt you." "Changes?" I echoed, incredulous. "You locked me out. You made me feel like a stranger in my own home. How is that a change? How is that protecting me?" The room fell silent except for the faint ticking of a clock. My heart raced as I realized the magnitude of what had happened. This was not just negligence. It was a breach of trust, a fracture in our family that would take time, care, and courage to repair. I walked to the living room, where the old furniture stood, unchanged in placement but altered in aura. The photographs on the wall smiled back at me, frozen moments of joy, love, and togetherness. And yet, the warmth they once radiated was dimmed, shadowed by the betrayal that hung over the house like a dark cloud. "Robert, I don't know if you understand the pain you've caused," I said softly. "I don't know if you realize that a child's actions can wound a parent in ways that time cannot easily heal." His eyes welled up. "Mom, I didn't think about that. I was selfish." I looked at him, really looked, and saw not only the guilt, but the confusion, the fear, the hesitation. He had crossed a line, yes, but he had also been a child of circumstance, raised with love yet flawed like all humans. I felt my anger soften, tempered by the recognition that people make mistakes, even those we love most. But forgiveness would not come easily. Not yet, not until action spoke louder than words. And that's when I made my decision. I would stay in the house, but on my terms. I would reclaim my home, my peace, and my authority, demonstrating that betrayal does not mean defeat. I began to move through the rooms, placing objects back where they belonged, restoring the rhythm of life to the spaces that had been disrupted. Each action was a quiet declaration. I am here. I am present. I am not powerless. Robert watched in silence, a mixture of shame and awe on his face. He had underestimated the resilience of the woman who had raised him. He had assumed that age, that vulnerability, meant weakness. He was wrong. And tomorrow, he would see just how wrong he had been. By nightfall, the house had settled into its usual rhythm, though the atmosphere was charged with unspoken tension. I prepared a simple meal for us both, setting the table with care. Robert ate quietly, eyes cast down, the weight of his actions pressing on him with every bite. I observed him, noting the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the quiet remorse, the hints of understanding that slowly crept into his posture. As I cleaned the dishes afterward, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and satisfaction. The day had begun with betrayal and abandonment, but it was ending with acknowledgement, a glimmer of hope that relationships could be mended, that trust could be rebuilt, even after the deepest wounds. I retired to my bedroom that night with a plan forming in my mind. Tomorrow, I would ensure that Robert truly understood the consequences of his actions, not through anger, not through vengeance, but through demonstration, through showing him the value of love, respect, and the unshakable strength of a mother who refuses to be diminished by betrayal. And with that thought, I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the day lift slightly, replaced by the resolve that had carried me through 7 decades of life. I would not be broken. I would rise, and in doing so, I would teach my son the lesson he so desperately needed to learn. The first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the living room. I awoke with a sense of purpose. The events of the previous day had left scars, but they had also ignited a fire within me. Today, I would act, not out of anger, but with precision, patience, and resolve. After a quick breakfast, I walked through the house again, noting every detail. The locks were secure, the doors firmly closed, and the house, though familiar, carried the faint tension of yesterday's betrayal. Robert was in the kitchen, moving quietly, almost apologetically. I watched him from the doorway, studying his expressions. Every glance, every gesture spoke volumes. He knew he had crossed a line, and now he was beginning to understand the weight of his actions. "Mom," he said, his voice tentative, I want to make this right. Please tell me what I can do." I shook my head slightly. "Words are easy, Robert. Actions are what matter. You've locked me out of my own home, humiliated me, and betrayed my trust. Actions will show whether you understand that." He nodded solemnly, and I could see a flicker of hope in his eyes, though I did not intend to make forgiveness easy. Not yet. Trust, once broken, must be rebuilt brick by brick, and he would learn that lesson the hard way. I led him to the study, where my late husband's papers and memorabilia were kept. "This room," I began, my voice steady, "has been part of this family for generations. It has held our history, our memories, our lives, and yesterday, it felt like you tried to erase it." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "If you want to regain any part of my trust, you will help me restore this house, this family, and the respect between us. And you will do it carefully, without rushing, without excuses." Robert swallowed hard, nodding in understanding. "Yes, Mom. I'll do whatever it takes." The day stretched on. We worked side by side, restoring photographs to their proper frames, dusting the furniture, straightening the rugs, and placing flowers in vases that had been neglected. Each task was deliberate, a lesson in patience, humility, and care. Robert moved slowly, attentively, as if he understood for the first time the depth of what he had taken for granted. I guided him, showing him the little details that mattered. The way a family photo should face the light, the angle of a lamp that cast warmth across the room, the placement of chairs to invite conversation. These were not just chores. They were symbols of our life together, the rhythm and harmony of our home. And as he worked, I could see a change in him. The arrogance, the carelessness, the assumption that he could act without consequence, they were all slipping away, replaced by awareness, respect, and quiet remorse. By late afternoon, the house had regained much of its warmth, though the tension between us remained. We took a brief pause, sitting in the living room with cups of tea. I watched him carefully, observing the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the lowered eyes, the hesitant gestures, the slight tremor in his hands. He was learning slowly that actions had weight, and that betrayal could never be erased with a simple apology. "Mom," he said quietly, "I realize now. I didn't just lock you out of the house. I locked myself out of your trust. I don't know if I can fix it, but I want to try." I studied him, noting the sincerity in his eyes. This was a turning point. His words were not enough, but they were a start. "Robert, understanding the wrong is the first step. But you must continue to prove it through every action you take from now on." The evening approached, and I decided to take him to the garden, a place that had always been a sanctuary for me. The flowers bloomed in vivid colors, a stark contrast to the gray shadows of our recent conflict. "This garden," I said softly, "has survived storms, neglect, and harsh winters. It thrives because it is cared for, nurtured, and respected. You must understand that relationships, like gardens, require attention, patience, and love to flourish." Robert listened intently, absorbing every word. I saw a flicker of realization in his eyes, the understanding that respect is earned, that love is nurtured, and that betrayal has consequences that are not easily undone. As night fell, I prepared a simple dinner, the aroma filling the house with a sense of normalcy that had been absent for too long. We ate in silence, the unspoken emotions hanging heavy in the air. I could sense the tension, but also the beginnings of understanding, the fragile thread of connection slowly weaving itself back together. After dinner, I retired to my bedroom to reflect. The day had been long, emotional, and exhausting, but it had also been revealing. Robert had begun to see the impact of his actions, and I had reinforced the message that respect and trust are not negotiable. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time since the betrayal, I felt a glimmer of hope that our relationship could heal. Before sleep, I placed a hand on the photograph of my late husband, whispering a quiet promise. "I will protect this home, this family, and our memories, and I will teach Robert the value of trust, no matter how long it takes." The room was silent, the shadows stretching across the walls, but I felt a renewed sense of strength. I was not just a mother, I was a guardian of our family legacy, and I would not allow it to be diminished by neglect, arrogance, or betrayal. As I closed my eyes, I envisioned the days ahead, a careful, deliberate journey toward restoration, understanding, and justice. Robert had much to learn, and I would be patient but firm. My home, my dignity, and my love were not to be taken lightly, and in that resolve, I found a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the next morning would bring another step forward, another opportunity to teach, guide, and reclaim what was rightfully mine. The next morning arrived with a sharp chill in the air. Mist hung low over the garden, curling around the flower beds like a quiet warning. I rose early, feeling a mix of anticipation and vigilance. Today, Robert would face another lesson, not one of chores or restoration, but of awareness. Actions taken in ignorance or selfishness had consequences that could ripple through lives, leaving marks that were not easily erased. I began the day with a simple task, preparing breakfast, just as I had every morning for decades. The familiar routine brought comfort to me, a steady anchor in a storm of recent upheavals. Robert entered the kitchen, his face pale and eyes downcast. He avoided my gaze, a subtle sign of the weight he felt pressing on his conscience. "Mom," he began hesitantly, I tried to think about last night, about what you said. I understand that this wasn't just about me being careless. It was about respect, about valuing you and this home." I nodded slowly. "Yes, Robert. But understanding is not enough. Respect must be shown in action consistently. And today, you'll see just how much your absence affected not only me, but the entire household." I led him to the old attic, a place rarely visited since my husband passed. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs clung to the corners like old memories that had been ignored for too long. The attic held boxes of letters, photographs, and heirlooms, fragments of lives, stories, and sacrifices. "Look around, Robert," I said, my voice firm yet calm. "This room has been here for decades. And yet, in one day, your absence and carelessness almost erased its significance in my heart. Neglect may not destroy objects, but it can destroy relationships and memories if left unchecked." Robert's eyes widened as he slowly began to examine the boxes, running his fingers over old letters and photographs. The weight of history pressed upon him in a tangible way, a reminder that family and heritage are delicate, fragile constructs that require attention and care. "You see," I continued, "these are not just objects. They are pieces of our lives, of our struggles, our joys, and our sorrows. When you disregarded me yesterday, you disregarded all of this, the past, the present, and the legacy we hold for the future. Do you understand that?" Robert's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Yes, Mom, I can see it now. I never realized how much a single moment of carelessness could impact everything you've built." I led him further into the attic, to a corner where a small trunk sat untouched for years. Inside were keepsakes from my youth, mementos of my late husband, and small tokens of family milestones. "This trunk," I said, "represents resilience. Every item tells a story of endurance, love, and sacrifice. And just as these objects have survived, so too can our family if respect and care are present. But if neglect continues, even the strongest bonds can fracture." Robert reached for a small framed photograph of his father and me, a moment frozen in time. His hand trembled slightly as he traced the outline of the smiling faces. I understand now. I was selfish, and I didn't think about the consequences. I should have been here for you, always." I let him hold the photograph for a moment, feeling the sincerity in his actions. It was one thing to apologize verbally, but it was another to internalize the lessons and allow them to shape behavior. Today, he had begun that transformation, but it would not be the last test. After spending an hour in the attic, I decided it was time for another important lesson. "Robert," I said, "we're going to visit the old neighborhood tomorrow, the place where your father and I raised you. You will see firsthand how actions, or the lack thereof, affect not only our home, but the community and people around us. You will understand the ripple effects of neglect and selfishness." His eyes reflected a mix of curiosity and apprehension. I'll do my best, Mom. I want to understand fully." Later that day, while Robert prepared dinner under my supervision, a knock echoed through the house. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone, and given the recent events, caution was necessary. I approached the door, peering through the peephole. Outside stood Mrs. Carter, an elderly neighbor and friend of our family for decades. She held a small basket of bread and preserves, a warm smile on her face. "Oh dear," she said gently as I opened the door. "I heard about what happened yesterday. I just wanted to check on you and make sure you're all right." I invited her in, grateful for the familiar comfort she brought. She greeted Robert politely, offering him a knowing glance that seemed to silently reinforce the lessons of the day. As we sat together, sipping tea and sharing stories, I realized how much community and external support play into lessons of respect and responsibility. Robert wasn't just learning for me. He was learning for the world outside, for the people whose lives intertwined with our own. As evening fell, the house seemed calmer, though the tension lingered beneath the surface. Robert helped me tidy the kitchen, placing dishes carefully, wiping down counters, and making sure everything was in its proper place. It was meticulous, deliberate work, but it reflected a growing understanding of responsibility and care. Before bed, I took a moment to walk through the living room. The house had shifted in energy over the past 24 hours. There was still a fragile tension, but also a hint of restoration, a fragile hope that what had been broken could begin to mend. I looked at Robert, now sitting quietly by the fireplace, reading a book I had placed for him on family history. It was a symbolic gesture, knowledge and reflection as a step toward growth and understanding. I whispered softly to myself, "This is only the beginning." The path to true understanding is long and winding, but today, a seed has been planted, and one day, it will grow into respect, love, and trust that cannot be easily shaken. The night settled over the house, wrapping it in quiet shadows. I closed my eyes, thinking of the lessons to come, the challenges yet to face, and the slow, deliberate journey toward redemption that Robert had begun. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile, flickering light that promised healing, understanding, and ultimately, the restoration of the bond between mother and son. The next morning, the house was still shrouded in a quiet, reflective haze. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting golden streaks across the wooden floors. But the warmth of the light could not erase the tension that lingered in the air. Robert had remained quiet since last night, absorbed in thought, and I allowed him this time to process the gravity of what had happened. Breakfast was simple. Toast, eggs, and tea, but the silence around the table was almost deafening. Every clink of silverware seemed amplified, a reminder that yesterday's events had changed the rhythm of our home. I looked at Robert, noticing the way his shoulders slumped slightly, the way his eyes, once so careless, now seemed heavy with realization. "Mom," he said after a long pause, his voice tentative, "I want to make this right. I don't want to just apologize. I want to do something that shows I've learned, that I respect everything you've built." I smiled faintly, seeing the first flickers of sincerity in his tone. "Actions, Robert, speak louder than words, but understanding takes time. Today, we'll begin by confronting the areas of the house you neglected, the rooms, the memories, the stories. You'll experience each, and you'll understand the importance of care and attention." We began in the living room. The furniture, once arranged with precision, had been left in slight disarray yesterday, a reflection of the emotional storm that had taken over. Robert carefully adjusted the cushions, dusted the surfaces, and rearranged the photographs. Every action was deliberate, showing a newfound mindfulness. I watched, silently acknowledging the effort, but knowing that this was only the beginning. Afterward, we moved to the library. Books, scattered in haphazard piles, told the story of a neglected household, but also of lessons yet to be learned. Robert began to place them in order, alphabetically and by genre, pausing occasionally to read passages that caught his eye. Each story he touched became a mirror, reflecting the importance of attention to detail, respect and responsibility. "Mom," he said softly, holding a worn journal, "I didn't realize how much you've preserved. Everything from family milestones to personal memories. I thought I understood, but seeing it like this, I get it now." We continued the day in this deliberate manner, room by room, each space holding a story, each object a lesson. As the sun climbed higher, the weight of yesterday began to lift slightly, replaced by a cautious hope that perhaps understanding could grow into genuine respect. In the afternoon, I suggested we visit the garden. The plants, though not in poor condition, had been neglected over the past few months. Robert rolled up his sleeves, dug into the soil, watered the flowers, and carefully pruned the overgrown bushes. Sweat glistened on his brow, but his movements were steady and deliberate. It was physical labor, yes, but also symbolic, a tangible way to restore the home and, in turn, repair the relationship between us. As he worked, I shared stories of the garden's history, how his father and I planted the roses together, how each bloom marked a memory, a milestone, a moment of happiness. I watched him listen, not just with his ears, but with his heart. Slowly, the lesson began to sink in. Care, respect, and love are not abstract concepts. They are practiced daily, nurtured like the plants he now tended. By late afternoon, the garden began to bloom under our combined efforts. The air smelled of earth and flowers, a sharp contrast to the tension that had filled the house just 24 hours prior. I looked at Robert, sweat-streaked and tired, but with eyes that now carried a quiet determination. "You're learning, Robert. That's a good start. But there's one final part of your lesson for today." He looked at me expectantly. I led him to the small attic window overlooking the woods behind the house. The shadows of the tall pines stretched across the lawn, whispering secrets carried by the wind. "Look at that forest," I said. "It's beautiful but dangerous if not respected. The same applies to our relationships. Neglect or thoughtless actions can allow danger to creep in, even in spaces you think are safe." Robert nodded solemnly, understanding the metaphor immediately. "I see, Mom. I never realized the consequences of just being absent or careless. I thought as long as I apologized, things would be fine, but I see now that it's the actions that matter most." That evening, as we prepared dinner, I noticed a shift in the household energy. The kitchen was filled with a quiet, productive hum. Robert moved with care, chopping vegetables and stirring the pot with deliberate precision. He paused occasionally to ask questions about recipes or family traditions, showing an interest in connection rather than mere compliance. Over dinner, the conversation flowed naturally, a marked difference from yesterday's tension. Robert shared stories from his childhood, moments he had forgotten or ignored, and I responded with anecdotes and laughter, bridging the gap that had been created by neglect. It was a tentative step toward reconciliation, but one that held genuine promise. After dinner, we settled in the living room. Robert sat beside me, and I handed him a photo album filled with images spanning decades. Each page held a memory, a lesson, a reminder of the love and dedication that had built our family. He traced the photos with his fingers, eyes misting with understanding and regret. "Mom," he whispered, "I can't change what I did yesterday, but I promise to be present from now on. I promise to care, to respect, and to honor everything you've done for me." I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Words are a start, Robert, but remember, it's the consistency of your actions that will truly define your growth. Today has been a beginning, but tomorrow and every day after are the true tests." The night grew deeper, and as we turned in for bed, a quiet sense of resolution filled the house. The storm of yesterday had passed, leaving a fragile peace in its wake. I knew the path to full reconciliation would be long and winding, but for the first time, I felt that Robert was ready to walk it with sincerity and purpose. As I lay awake, I reflected on the lessons of the day. Respect is not demanded, it is earned and nurtured. Love is not taken for granted, it is demonstrated in countless small, meaningful ways. And forgiveness, while powerful, requires a commitment to change from those who have caused hurt. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but today had shown me that even after betrayal or neglect, growth and understanding were possible. The bond between mother and son, once frayed, was slowly beginning to mend, stitched together with the threads of care, attention, and genuine remorse. The next morning, sunlight spilled generously through the kitchen windows, illuminating the small breakfast table where Robert had already begun preparing coffee. There was a rhythm to his movements now, a careful, deliberate rhythm that contrasted sharply with yesterday's chaos. I watched silently from the doorway, noting the way his hands trembled slightly as he poured, a reflection of nerves and genuine effort. "Mom," he said quietly, handing me a steaming cup. I wanted to make today better. Not just for me, but for us. Yesterday was a wake-up call I won't forget. I accepted the cup, taking a slow sip, feeling the warmth spread through me. The gesture, simple as it was, carried layers of meaning. Robert was beginning to internalize the lessons of respect, care, and accountability. "Thank you, Robert," I said softly. Acknowledging the past is one thing, but living differently today is the real test. Let's start with the garden again. There's still work to be done. Outside, the garden looked transformed after our labor yesterday, but the neglected corners still whispered tales of inattention. Robert rolled up his sleeves and began methodically tending to each plant, trimming overgrowth and replanting flowers that had begun to wilt. As he worked, I shared stories of past seasons, the storms we had weathered, the summers of laughter, and the winters of quiet reflection. Each tale reinforced the importance of care and presence. Halfway through the morning, a sudden rustling from the nearby woods startled us. The wind carried whispers through the tall pines, and for a moment, I felt a wave of unease. "It's nothing," I said, though my voice carried a slight tremor. "Just the wind, or perhaps a deer." Robert paused, glancing toward the forest line. "Mom, I realize now that neglect isn't just about forgetting. It's about leaving things vulnerable. People, places, even feelings. Yesterday I left our bond vulnerable and it nearly broke. Today, I want to fix that." We spent hours outside, each action deliberate, restoring not only the garden but the rhythm of our home. As the sun climbed, we paused for a simple lunch, sharing a sandwich and cold lemonade. There was a lightness to the conversation, a tentative warmth that had been absent during the tension of the previous days. Robert shared glimpses of his plans to be more present, more aware, and more responsible in both small and significant ways. After lunch, I suggested a walk through the surrounding woods. The path was familiar, lined with towering pines and the soft underbrush that rustled underfoot. I walked beside Robert, narrating stories of my own childhood, days spent exploring, lessons learned, and the wisdom gained from hardship. Each story served as both a memory and a cautionary tale, emphasizing the fragility and importance of human connection. During the walk, we stumbled upon an old broken bench near a creek. Its wood was splintered, and moss had claimed much of its surface. Robert knelt beside it, examining the damage. "Mom, this reminds me of us. Neglect can rot even the strongest foundations. I never realized how fragile trust and love can be without care." I nodded, seeing that he was truly beginning to grasp the consequences of inattention. "Exactly, Robert. And it's never too late to restore what's been damaged, but restoration takes patience, effort, and sincerity. Yesterday was a start. Today must build upon it." We spent the afternoon clearing brush and repairing the bench. Each stroke of effort symbolized more than physical labor. It represented the restoration of our bond, the rebuilding of trust, and the acknowledgement of responsibility. By the time the sun began to set, the forest glowed with golden hues reflecting in the creek, and the air was heavy with the scent of pine and soil. Returning home, the house seemed different, though unchanged in structure. The work outside had shifted the atmosphere inside, lending it a renewed sense of purpose. Robert paused at the doorway, taking a deep breath. "Mom, I think I'm finally starting to understand. I want to continue proving it, not just today, but every day." I smiled faintly, touched by the earnestness in his eyes. "Then let's continue tomorrow, and the day after, until actions, not words, define who we are." Evening fell, and the house settled into a calm rhythm. Dinner was prepared together, the laughter light but meaningful. For the first time since the conflict began, I felt that the household was truly moving toward healing. Robert had begun to internalize the lessons of yesterday, transforming awareness into deliberate action, remorse into effort, and tension into connection. After dinner, I suggested reviewing old family albums together. Robert's curiosity had grown, not just about the photographs, but about the stories behind them. Each image evoked memory and reflection, revealing the continuity of family, the significance of care, and the power of presence. As he traced the photographs with his fingers, I watched his expression soften, a blend of regret and understanding that words could not fully convey. Later that night, as we prepared for bed, Robert turned toward me. "Mom, I know this is just the beginning. I still have a lot to prove, but I want you to know that I'll keep trying every day. I want to rebuild what I almost lost." I reached out, holding his hand gently. "Actions, Robert, always actions. Yesterday you began. Today you strengthened your resolve. And tomorrow you must continue. True understanding comes not from words alone, but from persistent, meaningful effort." As I lay in bed, reflecting on the day, a quiet hope settled over me. The storm of neglect had passed, leaving a path toward reconciliation, illuminated by effort, accountability, and sincerity. Robert had begun to internalize the lessons of care, respect, and presence. It was still early, but the first sparks of transformation were visible, and I knew that our bond, once frayed, was slowly beginning to heal. The following morning, I woke to a quiet that felt different, lighter, almost tentative. The air was calm, but I could sense an undercurrent of anticipation, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I rose slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile rhythm that Robert and I were rebuilding. The sunlight streamed softly through the curtains, casting gentle patterns across the floor. Robert was already in the kitchen, moving with a deliberate grace that contrasted sharply with yesterday's frantic energy. He smiled when he saw me. "Good morning, Mom. I made your tea just the way you like it." Strong, with a hint of honey, I accepted the cup, savoring the warmth and aroma. The gesture was small, yet its significance was profound. It symbolized not just care but attention, an acknowledgement of the importance of presence and thoughtfulness. I realized that the transformation I was witnessing was not instantaneous but cumulative, built through acts, however small, that signaled understanding and commitment. As we sat together, the silence was comfortable rather than tense, filled with unspoken understanding. We spoke of ordinary things at first. Plans for the garden, errands to run, meals to prepare. But underneath, a deeper current flowed, a recognition that yesterday's conflict had been a turning point. It was not simply about my birthday, my exclusion, or the storm of emotions. It was about the essential truth that respect and care cannot be assumed. They must be enacted, daily and consciously. After breakfast, I suggested a walk around the property, feeling that nature's quiet wisdom could help consolidate the lessons learned. Robert agreed readily, and we stepped into the crisp morning air. The garden, trimmed and tended the day before, seemed to glow with new vitality. Birds chirped, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves, adding a gentle soundtrack to our reflection. As we walked, I recounted moments from my own life, choices, mistakes, and the ways I had tried to teach my children the values of accountability and compassion. Robert listened intently, his eyes fixed on mine, absorbing every word. It was clear he was not merely hearing my stories but processing them, letting the lessons settle within him. We reached the old oak tree at the edge of the property, its branches sprawling like a protective canopy. Here I paused. "Robert," I said, "life has a way of teaching lessons harshly if we do not learn them gently. Yesterday I was forced to confront neglect, betrayal, and disregard. But now we have a chance to rebuild, not just for today, but for all the days that follow." He nodded solemnly, his jaw tight with emotion. "Mom, I understand now. I never realized how my actions, or lack of them, could impact you. I can't change the past, but I will spend every day trying to be better." Not just for you, but for myself. For us. The sincerity in his voice resonated with me. For the first time in what felt like years, I sensed that the lessons I had tried to impart had truly begun to take root. Robert was no longer the distracted, indifferent son who had left me out in the storm. He was present, engaged, and willing to accept responsibility. Returning to the house, we decided to continue repairs and improvements inside. Rooms were dusted, floors scrubbed, and neglected corners restored. Every task we undertook was symbolic, a physical manifestation of the emotional work being done. Each room became a canvas for reconciliation, each action a step toward renewed trust and understanding. By late afternoon, exhaustion mingled with satisfaction. The house no longer felt like a monument to neglect and misunderstanding. It felt like a home again. Robert and I shared a quiet dinner, the conversation light yet meaningful. We spoke not only of the work we had accomplished, but also of the plans we envisioned for the future. There was a shared sense of purpose, a tangible hope that the bond between mother and son, once frayed, could be strengthened through deliberate, consistent effort. As night fell, I retreated to my favorite armchair by the window. The stars shone brightly, and a soft wind whispered through the trees. I reflected on the past 2 days, the storm, the confrontation, the fear, the lessons, and the fragile beginnings of restoration. Life had tested us, revealing both vulnerability and resilience. It had reminded me that care, respect, and attention are not merely expectations, but responsibilities that must be actively upheld. Robert knocked gently before entering the room. "Mom, thank you," he said simply. "Not just for trusting me to help, but for giving me the chance to make things right." I smiled, feeling a warmth that transcended words. "It's never too late to act with integrity, Robert. The past cannot be erased, but the future is ours to shape." He sat beside me, and we shared a quiet moment, the unspoken understanding between us more powerful than any conversation. The lessons of yesterday, the work of today, and the promise of tomorrow coalesced into a renewed bond, one strengthened by awareness, accountability, and love. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I reflected on the journey we had taken. From anger and disappointment to understanding and restoration, the path had been arduous but necessary. It had reaffirmed the importance of presence, respect, and deliberate care in maintaining the connections that define family and human relationships. As sleep approached, I felt a deep sense of peace. The storm had passed, leaving a home restored not just in structure but in spirit. Robert had begun to embody the lessons he had learned, transforming remorse into action and neglect into attention. And I knew that while challenges would undoubtedly arise in the future, the foundation of our relationship had been strengthened irrevocably by these 2 pivotal days. With that thought, I closed my eyes, letting the quiet of the night wrap around me like a protective blanket. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. Inside, the house, once a place of tension and neglect, now hummed with the energy of reconciliation, reflection, and hope. For the first time in a long while, I slept knowing that the bond between mother and son, though tested, had survived, and in its survival had grown stronger, more resilient, and more deeply rooted than ever before.